the 12 disciples first in one picture. I'm not really good at names, so I'm going to name all of them with a name and a picture like that. The first one, Simon Peter, Andrew, his brother, James and John, they're brothers to each other too. And they are, in fact, in our reading from Luke 5 as fishermen. We've got Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, and Judas. And you see a bag of money there, and he was a treasurer, and he becomes the trader. Matthew, the tax collector, we're going to talk about him a bit today. James, there are two names, James there. Daeus. Okay. Simon. We are going to talk about him a bit today. It was something else too. So these are the 12 disciples of Jesus Christ. So last Sunday we celebrated Easter, the Lord's resurrection. But what we find in the gospel is that there's many accounts of what happened to the disciples after, the post-resurrection. And if we go to the letters of the apostle, we can find a lot of accounts of what they did. And this map can reflect the later lives of the apostles. And there's a lot to cover, and my intention isn't to cover all of that. But one thing that we can think about first is that how small the land, Judea. The apostles are from Judea. And can you guess where Judea is at in this map? It's got to be small, right? A small country. So this is Israel and the land of Judea there. Jerusalem, Galilee, whatever that is, it's a really small country. But once they were commissioned by the Lord, after the Lord's resurrection, he stayed with the disciples quite a long time. Not a long time, but about 40 days. But once he ascends into heaven, and as he does so, he gives the disciples what's called the Great Commission. And after that, the disciples' life were pretty simple. They travel from one place to another. Wherever they go, they talked about Jesus Christ as the risen Lord, and etc., etc. And just think about how small their hometown was like that as compared to the span or the coverage that they made with their missionary work. And they literally put their own lives to it. And all of them died in doing so. So that's one picture that we can have on one side. But for today, we're going to talk about the disciples, 4 of them at least, as fishermen. Who were they? So our reading comes from the Gospel of Luke 5, verses 1 to 11. So it was as the multitude pressed about the Lord to hear the word of God that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, and saw 2 boats standing by the lake. But the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon Peter's, and asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the multitude from the boat. When it stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." But Simon answered and said to him, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I'll let down the net." And when they had done this, they cut in natural light. Teaches nothing except what has entered through the eyes, does nothing except what relates to the world and self. And from this is our natural life. And so long as we are in this only, we are in hell. And therefore, that we may be withdrawn from this and be led to heaven, we must learn truth, which teach not only that there is a God, that there is a heaven and a hell, and that there is a life after death, but also teach the way to heaven. From this, it is clear that truth is the primary thing by which the church is formed in a person. However, it must be truth from goodness. For truth without good or goodness is just mere knowledge that a thing is so. And mere knowledge does nothing except to make people or us capable of becoming a church, but not a church yet. But this is not effected until we live according to knowledge of the truth. Because the truth from good, which is from the Lord, is the first thing of the church, Peter was the first to be called, and was the first of the apostles. And he was also named by the Lord Cephas, which means Petra, a rock. But that it might be the name of a person, he is called Peter. Amen. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all. I'd like to first talk about what happened during the week. Some of us will remember that we had a class this past Thursday, and we talked about our younger years. As part of the material, I shared a short video clip of myself being a bit childish, a little reckless, but also just having fun with a snowman I made with my friends. And that was when I was at the college in the United States in early my 20s. The subject for the class was the prodigal son, and we reflected on how the prodigal son in many ways can represent us in our younger years, perhaps in our late teens or early 20s. And some of the thoughts we mused about was that we each have a starting point, right? We don't begin as wise people. We cannot jump from being a child or an immature teenager straight into someone who is wise, patient, and able to love and understand other people better. There's a big gap. There's a big gap. So we have to earn and work out each step of the way, which takes a lot of self-discipline and time. And speaking of self-discipline, we can talk about the 12 disciples. Discipline, disciples. Thank you. In fact, their stories show us something very similar to what we just said. Initially, the disciple didn't seem to be prepared, let alone wise. As a matter of fact, often they were not patient. They were not yet dedicated to something beyond themselves. They still seemed to care a lot about what they were thinking. So certainly they were not yet there, especially until they came to believe in the risen Lord after the resurrection. So this morning I'd like to invite us to think that the disciples were just ordinary people to begin with. They were ordinary people just like every one of us here. They're going to see a massive change for themselves in their lives. But until then, again, immature, maybe a bit reckless, just like how we can be at times. And we are going to take a look at why it is fair to say so. For one, they had a normal job. For example, 4 of the 12 were fishermen, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Back then, a fisherman was a common job. I mean, you would need to have some training and skills, such as knowing how to sail a boat, read the weather and the wind, because you would have to know when to sail or not. And you would need to know how to cast nets, catch fish, how to mend nets and your boats. But still, it was an everyday job that was open for everybody, and 4 or even more of the 12 were fishermen. What about other disciples? We actually don't know what job each disciple had, but we can say that probably most of them were working class. There were a couple of exceptions, though. Matthew and Simon had different and even untypical background. First, I think I've got an image there. Matthew was a tax collector. That was not a common job to have as a Jew, because if you were a tax collector at the time, you'd be hated by default by every one of your fellow Jews. So Matthew and his background was one of the outliers. And we have one more. What about Simon? Not Simon Peter, but Simon. Simon most likely was a political nationalist before he was called by Jesus. So he had too a unique background among the disciples. But we can say aside from these two, the rest of the disciples were most likely ordinary working class citizens having a normal job day to day. And the disciples were just like one of us for another reason. They were flawed men or people. I think some people get an idea that they were great people or exceptional human beings because they joined the team. They got the title of the disciples of Jesus Christ. Can we say that were they exceptional human beings or even perfect human beings? Often, however, the disciple misbehaved. They're being the bad examples to not follow, and it would be interesting to explore this topic more, but today we'll pick 2 examples briefly, beginning with Peter. Simon Peter was one of the most faithful disciples among the 12. In fact, Jesus once told him this: "You are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. And the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. And I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. And whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." This is quite a lot that the Lord was entrusting to Peter. And of course, we know that the Lord was not speaking of Peter himself as a person. And according to the teachings of the new church, especially, the Lord was speaking of Peter as the rock of faith. And the name Peter in Greek language, in fact, had a root meaning of rock. So essentially what the Lord was saying in his word here is that he would build his church upon faith that's like a rock. Faith that is grounded in the truth of faith, that is also from the good of love. But it is undeniable that Peter was one of the central figures among the disciples all along. However, often he was not the good example of faith. We all remember that he was the one who denied Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus was arrested. And how about when Peter took Jesus aside and even rebuked him in Matthew 16? So the Lord had to correct Peter, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," speaking to Peter. "You are an offense to me because you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of man. Peter, as a disciple, was not a perfect human being, but a flawed one as well. How about Thomas? Thomas was the one who doubted when he was told that Jesus resurrected and had appeared to other disciples. But he could not believe that and said this, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Eventually, he comes to believe, once he met and saw the Lord in person, that it was the Lord himself who resurrected. But initially, Thomas was a skeptical man with big doubts, wanting the evidence first, or being too pragmatic or whatnot. He, too, was a flawed man. But something changed. Once they saw the Lord who resurrected, once they spoke with him, once they stayed with him, their lives were never the same from that point on. One change was that they became fearless with what they believed and what they were called on to do. Now they were mission-driven, and this is the Great Commission they were given. And their mission was plain and clear. Go out there in the world and spread the word of the Lord. Preach about what Jesus' life was all about and what his teachings are at the core. And they charged ahead with it headlong. Now we are going to quote from the book of Acts. It's worthwhile to look at the epistles for information about what followed, especially post-resurrection, as to or about the disciples' personal changes that we were just talking about. And our quote for today is from the book of Acts, chapter 2, and it offers a small window of what their lives were like. And our example here is Peter. Basically, he gives an address or preaching to people, his fellow Jew, and what he says here is outstanding. As he speaks, he quotes from the Old Testament, and he works from such a big confidence, 100% commitment. And this is how it begins. Peter, standing up with the 11, raised his voice and said to them, "Fellow Jews, all of you who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and heed my words." And then he quotes the book of Joel chapter 2, which is a wonderful piece, and then quotes another one from David's Psalm chapter